After hiking alone for weeks in the mountains, a man discovers an abandoned barn that seems untouched by time. Inside, he finds photographs, journals, and relics that eerily document moments from his own life, including events that haven't happened yet. As he searches for answers, he's drawn into a supernatural mystery that challenges his understanding of fate, memory, and destiny. What he uncovers inside the barn will alter not only his life, but the course of reality itself. The weathered wooden structure stands like a monument to impossible possibilities, filled with evidence of a future he hasn't lived and memories he's never made. But if these visions are true, how can he change what's already been written? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Wells had been walking for 3 weeks, and his body showed it. The 35-year-old former tech executive carried 20 pounds less than when he'd started, his designer hiking boots worn thin from countless miles of rocky terrain. The mountains of northern Montana stretched endlessly around him, a maze of pine-covered ridges and hidden valleys that had become his sanctuary from a life that had imploded spectacularly. The burnout had been complete. 12 years building software solutions for Fortune 500 companies, climbing the corporate ladder with ruthless efficiency, accumulating wealth and status while his soul withered. The panic attacks started during board meetings. The insomnia followed. Then came the day he walked out of his corner office, left his BMW in the parking garage, and drove straight to the nearest outdoor gear store. Now, as afternoon shadows stretched across the valley floor, Marcus crested a ridge he'd never seen on any topographical map. Below him lay a hidden basin, sheltered by towering peaks that seemed to guard their secrets jealously. Ancient pines grew thick along the valley floor, and a crystal stream meandered through meadows dotted with wildflowers. But it was the barn that stopped him cold. The structure sat alone in the center of the meadow, weathered grey wood silvered by decades of mountain weather. It looked impossibly old, yet somehow solid, as if time itself had forgotten to touch it. No farmhouse stood nearby. No other buildings suggested human habitation. Just the barn, solitary and mysterious, surrounded by wilderness that showed no signs of civilization. Marcus consulted his GPS device, frowning at the blank screen. No signal here, deep in the mountain shadows. His paper map showed nothing but empty wilderness for 50 miles in any direction. Yet here stood clear evidence of human presence, isolated and inexplicable. His rational mind catalogued possibilities. Abandoned homestead from the 1800s, hunting cabin, Forest Service structure, but something about the barn's positioning felt deliberate, purposeful, as if it had been placed there for someone to find. The descent into the valley took 40 minutes of careful navigation through loose scree and thick undergrowth. Marcus approached the barn with growing unease, every instinct screaming that he was trespassing on something sacred or forbidden. The wooden walls rose 12 feet high, constructed from massive hand-hewn timbers that spoke of serious craftsmanship. Iron hinges, black with age but showing no rust, supported a door that hung perfectly straight despite the building's obvious antiquity. No windows pierced the walls, lending the structure an air of secrecy. Marcus circled the barn twice before approaching the door. His grandfather's compass, hanging from his neck on a leather cord, pointed steadily north, but the needle trembled as if responding to some magnetic anomaly. The brass instrument had been his only inheritance, worn smooth by generations of hands, and he'd carried it on every hiking expedition since college. The door opened at his touch, hinges moving silently despite their age. Cool air flowed out, carrying scents of old wood and something else. Something familiar yet impossible to identify. Marcus stepped across the threshold and immediately understood that this was no ordinary abandoned building. The interior glowed with soft golden light that seemed to emanate from the wood itself. Dust motes danced in shafts of illumination that had no visible source. The space was larger than the exterior suggested, stretching back into shadows that defied architectural logic. But it was the contents that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Tables lined the walls, covered with objects that sparkled in the mysterious light. Photographs in ornate frames, leather-bound books, trinkets and mementos that created a museum of someone's entire life. The air hummed with potential energy, as if the barn itself was alive and waiting. Marcus moved deeper into the space, drawn by a magnetism he couldn't resist. On the nearest table lay a hand-drawn map, incredibly detailed, showing mountain trails and landmarks. The paper looked aged, yellowed with time, but the route depicted matched exactly the path Marcus had taken to reach this valley. His own handwriting labeled key waypoints along the trail. Marcus stared at the map, mind reeling. The penmanship was unmistakably his, the distinctive way he formed letters, the particular slant of his script. But the paper showed decades of age, and the ink had faded to brown. He'd never drawn this map, never been in this valley before today. Yet there it was, in his own hand, documenting the precise route that had led him here. Marcus forced himself to move deeper into the barn, legs unsteady beneath him. The trail map remained on the table behind him, impossible yet undeniable, while stranger revelations waited ahead. Photo albums lined the next table, their leather covers worn smooth by countless hands. He opened the nearest one with trembling fingers. The first page showed him at his college graduation, cap and gown pristine, diploma held high. But standing beside him was his father, who had died of a heart attack 2 years before Marcus finished school. In the photograph, his father looked proud and healthy, exactly as Marcus remembered him from childhood. Marcus flipped pages frantically. There he was, at his 30th birthday party, surrounded by friends he recognized, but the celebration took place in a house he'd never seen. Another photo showed him skiing in Aspen, though he'd never been to Colorado. Each image felt authentic, captured moments from a life that paralleled his own, but contained impossible differences. Then he found the wedding photos. The album fell open to a professional portrait that made his heart stop. There he stood in an elegant black tuxedo, beaming with joy as he kissed a stunning woman in flowing white silk. Her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and her smile radiated the kind of happiness that transforms a person's entire face. The photograph captured a moment of pure love between two people who belonged together completely. Marcus had never seen this woman before in his life. He studied her features desperately, searching his memory for any recognition. High cheekbones framed expressive brown eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth. She looked to be in her early 30s, with an artist's hands and a dancer's graceful posture. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. She possessed an inner light that made beauty almost irrelevant. The wedding had taken place in a small chapel surrounded by mountains that looked remarkably like this valley. Guests filled the pews, faces Marcus recognized as family and friends, all celebrating a marriage that had never happened. The date embossed in gold at the bottom of the page read June 15th, exactly 5 years from today. Marcus turned pages with growing desperation. The honeymoon in Italy, first Christmas together, buying their first house. Each photograph documented a relationship that felt more real than anything in his actual life, yet existed only in these impossible images. More albums revealed more mysteries. Photos of him holding a newborn baby, the same beautiful woman beside him in a hospital bed, both parents glowing with exhaustion and joy. Pictures of birthday parties for a child who grew year by year. A little boy with Marcus's stubborn chin and his mother's expressive eyes. The boy learned to walk in a backyard Marcus had never seen. Took his first steps toward Marcus's outstretched arms in a moment that felt like the most important of Marcus's life. Though it had never happened, family vacations documented adventures across the country. The boy learned to fish in mountain streams while Marcus watched with paternal pride. They built sand castles on beaches Marcus had never visited, hiked trails through national parks he'd never seen. Each photograph showed a father and son growing closer through shared adventures and quiet moments. Graduation photos showed the boy becoming a young man, accepting diplomas and awards, while his parents beamed from the audience. College send-off pictures captured tearful goodbyes and proud embraces. Wedding photos eventually showed the cycle beginning again, as the grown son married a lovely young woman and started his own family. The final album contained photos of Marcus in his 70s, silver-haired and distinguished, surrounded by grandchildren who climbed on his lap and listened to his stories. The beautiful woman sat beside him, aged gracefully, her hand resting in his with the comfort of decades together. Their love had deepened rather than diminished, written in every shared glance and gentle touch. The last photograph showed them together on a porch swing, watching sunset paint the mountains gold. Both looked peaceful, content, fulfilled by a life lived completely together. A life Marcus had somehow missed entirely. He closed the album and stepped back, mind reeling. Every photograph felt authentic, captured moments from what should have been his real life. The emotions were genuine, the relationships deep and meaningful. Yet none of it had ever happened. How could someone create such elaborate fiction? The photographs spanned decades, showing consistent aging and relationships that developed naturally over time. The technical quality was flawless, with no signs of digital manipulation. But more than that, the emotional truth in each image felt absolutely real. Marcus looked around the barn with new eyes. This wasn't just a collection of random objects. It was a complete life story, documented in impossible detail. Someone had created a comprehensive, alternate history of his existence, one far richer and more meaningful than the life he'd actually lived. Beyond the photograph albums, Marcus discovered a collection of leather-bound journals stacked in careful rows. Each volume bore dates spanning decades, starting from next year and extending far into a future he couldn't imagine. The handwriting on every spine was unmistakably his own. He pulled the first journal from the shelf, hands shaking as he opened to the initial entry. The date read exactly 1 year from today, and the familiar script made his stomach lurch with recognition. Elena and I had our first real fight today. She thinks I'm being too cautious about the gallery showing, but I can't shake the feeling that rushing into the art world will change everything between us. She has this way of pushing me toward my dreams, even when I'm terrified of reaching for them. I love her for that, but sometimes I wish she understood how much I need her to be patient with my fears. Marcus read the passage 3 times. The voice was definitely his, the introspective tone, the tendency to overthink emotional situations, the way he processed relationship dynamics through writing. But he'd never met anyone named Elena, had never considered pursuing art seriously, and had certainly never worried about gallery showings. He flipped through pages, finding entry after entry, documenting a life he'd never lived. The future Marcus wrote about career changes with careful deliberation, leaving the tech industry to pursue sculpture and mixed media art. Financial struggles followed, but also a sense of purpose that had been missing from his corporate existence. Elena brought coffee to the studio today and found me staring at a half-finished piece for 3 hours. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me and waited until I was ready to talk. That's when I knew I wanted to marry her. Not because of grand romantic gestures or passionate declarations, but because she understands that creativity requires patience, even with yourself. Marcus felt his chest tighten. The intimacy described in these pages, the deep understanding between 2 people building a life together, it was everything he'd always wanted but never found. His actual relationships had been surface-level affairs. Convenient arrangements that satisfied physical needs but left his soul untouched. Later entries documented the proposal, written with the nervous excitement of a man taking the biggest risk of his life. I'm going to ask her tomorrow. The ring isn't much. I spent everything I had, but it's still modest compared to what she deserves. But Elena has never cared about expensive things. She cares about intention, about meaning, about the stories objects carry. This ring carries my promise to grow beside her for whatever time we have. The wedding planning entries revealed Elena's personality through Marcus's observations. She wanted a small ceremony focused on family and close friends rather than an elaborate production. She chose wildflowers over expensive arrangements, wrote her own vows, insisted on donating leftover food to a local shelter. Every detail reflected someone who valued substance over appearance. Marcus found himself falling in love with a woman he'd never met, through the eyes of a version of himself he'd never been. The journals documented their first year of marriage with honest detail. Financial struggles as two artists tried to build careers together. Elena's freelance graphic design work paying bills, while Marcus developed his artistic voice. Arguments about money, space, creative differences, and family obligations. But also profound connection, shared dreams, the gradual building of partnership that transcended romance. Elena's mother called her selfish today for marrying an unstable artist instead of finding a man with a real career. Elena defended me fiercely, but I could see the doubt creeping in afterward. Not doubt about us, but doubt about whether I'm strong enough to protect what we're building together. I have to prove that choosing love over security was the right decision for both of us. As the journals progressed, Marcus watched himself grow into the man Elena deserved. The future Marcus became more confident, more decisive, more willing to take risks for their shared vision. Success came gradually, first small gallery showings, then regional recognition. Eventually, national exhibitions that established him as a significant contemporary artist. But the real growth showed in the relationship entries. The future Marcus learned to communicate better, to support Elena's own artistic ambitions, to navigate the challenges that tested their partnership. Their love deepened through shared struggles and celebrated triumphs. The birth of their son appeared as a watershed moment, transforming both parents in ways they hadn't expected. Holding David for the first time, I understood what Elena meant about love being a choice you make every day. This isn't just biological imperative or emotional attachment. It's a conscious decision to put someone else's well-being ahead of your own comfort, forever. I choose to be the father this child deserves, the husband Elena needs, the man I never had courage to become before. Marcus set down the journal and noticed his grandfather's compass had grown warm against his chest. The brass gleamed more brightly than he remembered, and the needle spun lazily before settling on magnetic north. Without thinking, he lifted the compass and held it in his palm. The barn disappeared. Marcus stood in a sun-drenched backyard, watching a dark-haired boy of perhaps 8 years old struggle with a tangled fishing line. The child's face showed concentration mixed with frustration, his small fingers working patiently at knots that seemed impossible to untangle. "Need some help there, David?" The voice was his own, but deeper, more confident than he remembered. Marcus looked down to see hands that were his, but aged, weathered by decades of work and sun. He wore a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans, clothes that felt comfortable in a way his expensive corporate wardrobe never had. The lines all messed up. "Dad, I think I broke it. Dad." The word hit Marcus like electricity. This boy was his son, calling him Dad with the casual familiarity of a lifetime together. David had Elena's expressive eyes, but Marcus's stubborn jawline. A perfect blend of his parents' features. "Let me see." Marcus knelt beside the boy, muscle memory guiding hands that knew exactly how to untangle fishing line. "Your grandfather taught me this trick when I was about your age. You work from the outside in, following each loop until you find the main knot." Grandpa Harold. "The one who died before I was born?" "That's right. He was a patient man, never got frustrated when I made mistakes. Said fishing was about spending time together, not catching fish." Marcus worked the line free, amazed by knowledge he didn't remember acquiring. His grandfather Harold had died when Marcus was 12, after teaching him basic outdoor skills during summer visits. But this older version of himself had clearly built on those early lessons, becoming the kind of outdoorsman who could pass wisdom to the next generation. There we go. Good as new. Marcus handed the rod back to David, who beamed with admiration. You can fix anything, Dad. Not everything, buddy. But fishing line is easy compared to some problems. They walked together toward a small pond, David chattering about school friends and upcoming birthday parties. Marcus listened with the attention of a father who genuinely enjoyed his son's company, asking questions that showed deep interest in David's world. The pond reflected afternoon sunlight, surrounded by cattails and willows that provided perfect cover for fish. A small dock extended into deeper water, hand-built from weathered planks that showed careful craftsmanship. Did you build this dock, Dad? Your mom and I built it together the summer before you were born. She insisted on helping even though she was 8 months pregnant. Stubborn woman, your mother. Mom says you're the stubborn one, Marcus laughed, a sound of pure happiness that surprised him. She's probably right. We're both pretty stubborn. That's how we got through the tough times. They cast their lines into the calm water, settling into the comfortable silence that exists between people who don't need constant conversation. David imitated his father's casting technique with the seriousness of someone learning important life skills. Dad, are you ever scared of things? The question came from nowhere, delivered with the directness children use for profound inquiries. Marcus considered his answer carefully. Sure I am. Being scared isn't the problem. Staying scared is. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing, even when you're terrified. What scares you? Marcus thought about this older version of himself, the choices that had led to this moment of perfect contentment. I used to be scared of taking risks, of changing my life when I wasn't happy. I was afraid I'd fail, or that people would think less of me. But the biggest risk turned out to be not taking any risks at all. Is that why you became an artist, instead of working in an office? Partly, but mostly I changed because I met your mother. She helped me see that playing it safe was just another way of giving up on my dreams. David nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom with the gravity children bring to adult revelations. His line jerked, signaling a bite, and father and son worked together to land a modest base that fought with surprising strength. The vision faded as Marcus released the compass, finding himself back in the barn's golden light. But the memory lingered with startling clarity. The weight of his son in his arms, the sound of David's laughter, the profound satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged. Marcus stumbled out of the barn on unsteady legs, the vision of his future son still vivid in his mind. The mountain air felt thin and cold after the barn's golden warmth, and he struggled to reconcile what he'd experienced with any rational explanation. Hallucination seemed most likely, brought on by exhaustion and isolation. But the memory felt more real than most of his actual experiences. He made camp 200 yards from the barn, close enough to keep it in sight, but far enough to think clearly. As he pitched his tent in the gathering dusk, Marcus tried to process what he'd discovered. The trail map, the photographs, the journals, the vision, each impossible on its own. Collectively, they suggested something far beyond coincidence or delusion. His satellite phone showed no signal, as expected in this remote valley. But when he checked his regular smartphone, hoping to ground himself in familiar technology, the device displayed something that made his blood freeze. New photos had appeared in his camera roll. Marcus scrolled through images he'd never taken. There was Elena, the woman from the wedding photos, laughing as she painted on a canvas in bright sunlight. Another showed the two of them hiking together, Marcus's arm around her shoulders as they posed before a mountain vista. A third captured an intimate moment, Elena asleep in his arms, both of them peaceful and content. The photos looked recent, taken with his phone's camera based on the metadata. But Marcus had never met Elena, never been to the location shown, never experienced the moments captured. Yet the images felt authentic, filled with the natural ease of a couple comfortable together. More disturbing were the contacts in his phone. Elena Rodriguez appeared in his address book, complete with phone number, email, and a street address in Missoula, Montana. The contact entry included notes Marcus had never written. Anniversary, June 15th. Favorite flowers, sunflowers. Coffee order, oat milk latte, extra shot. His calendar now showed appointments he'd never made. Dinner with Elena, 7 p.m., Giuseppe's. Art supply shopping. Visit David's school, parent conference. Events scattered through the coming months. Documenting a life he wasn't living, Marcus powered off the phone and threw it into his backpack, as if distance could stop the impossible transformations. But the damage was done. His normal world was contaminating itself with evidence of an alternate existence, one that seemed increasingly more appealing than his actual life. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of the dark-haired woman whose smile haunted his subconscious. He woke repeatedly, checking his phone for new changes, finding fresh photos each time. Elena working in a garden, Elena reading beside a fireplace, Elena holding a baby that looked exactly like the boy from his vision. Dawn found Marcus hollow-eyed and shaking, confronted by technology that reflected a life he'd never lived but desperately wanted. The rational explanations had crumbled completely. No hacker could create such elaborate fiction. No mental breakdown could generate such consistent details. Something impossible was happening, and he could no longer deny it. He called his sister Jessica in Portland, hoping familiar conversation would anchor him to reality. "Marcus, thank God. I've been worried sick. You've been gone for weeks without real contact." "I'm fine, Jess. Just needed some time to think." "About what?" "You walked away from everything. Your job, your apartment, your entire life. People are starting to worry about your mental state." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. If Jessica knew what he'd discovered in the barn, mental health would be the least of their concerns. "I'm considering some major changes. Career shift, maybe relocating." "To where?" "You've never shown interest in living anywhere but Seattle, Montana possibly." "I think I might want to try something completely different." The silence stretched long enough that Marcus checked his phone connection. "Marcus, this doesn't sound like you at all. You've always been the practical one, the planner. Sudden life changes aren't your style." But they could be, Marcus thought. The journals showed a version of himself capable of taking risks, of choosing passion over security, of building something meaningful rather than simply accumulating wealth and status. "Maybe it's time I became someone different." "Are you sure you're okay? This sounds like some kind of breakdown." Marcus looked toward the barn, its weathered walls hiding secrets that challenged everything he'd believed about reality, choice and destiny. "I'm more okay than I've been in years. I'll call you soon." After ending the call, Marcus realized his phone had changed again. Elena's contact now included dozens of text message conversations he'd never had, filled with intimate exchanges that painted a picture of deep love and daily partnership. Reading them felt like voyeurism into his own alternate life. Marcus hiked out of the valley the next morning, driven by a desperate need to understand what he'd experienced. The 3-hour trek to the nearest road felt like emerging from an alternate dimension into mundane reality. His truck waited where he'd left it, covered in pine needles and looking ordinary in a way that almost brought tears to his eyes. The drive to Kalispell took 2 hours through winding mountain roads that gradually returned him to civilization. Cell towers and gas stations had never seemed so reassuring. Concrete proof that the normal world still existed despite the impossibilities he'd encountered. The Flathead County Courthouse sat on Main Street, a solid brick building that housed decades of public records. Marcus approached the research desk with the careful composure of someone trying to appear rational while investigating the impossible. "I need property records for a parcel in the North Fork area," he told the elderly clerk. "No specific address, but I can describe the location." The woman, whose nameplate read Dorothy Brennan, looked up from her computer with practiced patience. "Honey, that's a lot of territory. You got section numbers or legal descriptions?" Marcus sketched the valley's approximate location on a piece of paper, marking landmarks he remembered from his approach. Dorothy studied the drawing with professional interest. That might be the old Kane property. Haven't had anyone ask about that place in maybe 10 years. Kane. Jeremiah Kane. Built that barn back in 1892, if I remember right. Bit of a character, from what the old records say. Dorothy led Marcus to a filing cabinet filled with documents that smelled of age and bureaucracy. She pulled a thick folder containing property deeds, tax records, and correspondence dating back over a century. The original land patent showed Jeremiah Kane claiming 160 acres under the Homestead Act, but it was the accompanying correspondence that made Marcus's hands tremble as he read. A letter dated September 15th, 1892, written in flowing script on official territorial letterhead. Mr. Kane appeared before this office today, claiming the barn he constructed possesses unusual properties. He states that touching certain objects within the structure allows him to witness tomorrow's sorrows and joys with perfect clarity. When pressed for details, Mr. Kane described future events with disturbing accuracy, including my own marriage to Miss Catherine Wells next spring, a union I have not yet proposed nor she accepted. I'm documenting this encounter for official record, though I question the man's sanity. The letter was signed by Territorial Administrator William Hartley. A notation in different handwriting, added years later, confirmed that Hartley had indeed married Catherine Wells in the spring of 1893. Marcus found similar accounts throughout the decades. A 1923 report from a Forest Service ranger described finding Kane, then in his 70s, living alone in the valley, and claiming the barn showed him visions of times yet to come. Kane had accurately predicted the ranger's promotion and transfer to Yellowstone 2 years before it occurred. The final official mention came in 1924. Jeremiah Kane found deceased in his cabin, age approximately 85. Property reverted to territorial ownership. Barn structure remains intact despite abandonment, but unofficial accounts continued. Dorothy pulled newspaper clippings from the 1940s describing hunters who'd stumbled across the fortune-telling barn and emerged claiming to have seen their own futures. Most were dismissed as tall tales, but the details showed remarkable consistency. Marcus discovered that the property had changed hands 7 times since Kane's death. Each owner had held it briefly before selling, often at a loss. The pattern was always the same. Initial fascination with the barn's alleged properties, followed by urgent desire to be rid of the land entirely. The most recent sale occurred in 1995, when Elizabeth Hart purchased the property for $50,000 and sold it 3 years later for $25,000. The buyer, listed as North Fork Wilderness Trust, appeared to be a shell corporation with no other documented activities. Dorothy watched Marcus read with growing curiosity. You planning to buy up there? Maybe. What can you tell me about Elizabeth Hart? Oh, Betty's still around. Lives in a trailer park east of town. Strange woman, keeps to herself mostly. But she worked as a librarian for 40 years before retiring. So she's sharp as a tack. Marcus copied down Elizabeth Hart's address, feeling like a detective following leads in a case that defied rational investigation. The historical records couldn't explain what he'd experienced, but they confirmed he wasn't the first person to encounter the barn's impossible properties. As he prepared to leave, Dorothy pulled one final document from the file. Almost forgot about this. Betty Hart left this letter with instructions to give it to anyone asking about the property. The sealed envelope bore Marcus's name in careful handwriting he didn't recognize, Elizabeth. Hart lived in a double-wide trailer at the edge of Kalispell, surrounded by a garden that suggested someone who understood the patience required to make things grow. Marcus found her sitting on a small porch, reading a thick novel and sipping tea from a china cup that seemed too delicate for the rustic setting. She looked up as he approached, and her eyes held the calm recognition of someone who'd been expecting him. You found the barn. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. The courthouse clerk said you might be willing to talk about it. Elizabeth Hart was smaller than he'd expected. Perhaps 78 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands that showed decades of careful work. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, the kind that missed very little. "Sit down. Mr. Wells, we have quite a bit to discuss." Marcus settled into the offered chair, noting that she'd used his name before he'd introduced himself. How did you know?" "The same way you know things now that you shouldn't. The barn shows us what we need to see when we're ready to see it." Elizabeth poured him tea without asking if he wanted any. "I saw you coming 30 years ago." She reached into a wooden box beside her chair and withdrew a faded letter, the same one Dorothy had given him at the courthouse. "Open it now. You'll find it more useful than when I wrote it." Marcus broke the seal with trembling fingers. The letter was dated 1995, 3 years before Elizabeth had sold the property. "Dear Marcus Wells," it began. "If you're reading this, you've discovered what Jeremiah Kane left behind. You're probably frightened, confused, questioning your sanity. I understand completely because I felt the same way when I found my own future waiting in that barn 30 years ago." Marcus looked up to find Elizabeth watching him with compassionate understanding. "It showed you your life with her, didn't it? The woman you're meant to love." "Elena, but I've never met anyone by that name." "How is any of this possible?" Elizabeth smiled sadly. "The barn exists outside normal time, Marcus. Jeremiah Kane was more than just a homesteader. He was a man who understood that some places become thin between what is and what could be. He built that structure as a gift to those who needed guidance at crucial moments." She continued reading aloud from the letter. "The visions you've seen aren't fantasies or delusions. They're possibilities, potential futures that exist if you have the courage to choose them. But they're also warnings about what you'll lose if you don't." "Warnings? Did you see only the happy timeline?" "Most people do at first. The barn shows us what we most want to encourage the choices that lead there. But there are other possibilities, darker ones." Elizabeth stood and walked to a shelf inside her trailer, returning with a photograph album much smaller than the ones Marcus had found in the barn. She opened it to reveal pictures of herself as a younger woman, happy and radiant beside a man Marcus didn't recognize. "This was my James. The barn showed me our life together. Marriage, children, grandchildren, 40 years of happiness. I was 28 then, working as a librarian, convinced I'd never find love. What happened? I got scared. The responsibility of choosing was overwhelming, so I did nothing. I waited for fate to bring James to me, instead of actively pursuing the life I'd seen." Elizabeth's voice carried decades of regret. "He moved away 6 months later, married someone else, had the children I saw in the visions, just not with me." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "The barn showed you a future that didn't happen?" "The barn shows possibilities, Marcus, but possibilities require action to become reality. I learned too late that seeing your future isn't enough. You have to fight for it." She turned the page to reveal photos of herself alone, growing older in the same small apartment, surrounded by books but no family. "This is the life I chose through inaction. 30 years of regret for being too frightened to reach for happiness when it was offered. Is that why you sold the property?" "I couldn't bear seeing what I'd given up. But before I left, the barn showed me one final vision. You standing exactly where I had stood, facing the same choice between courage and fear." Elizabeth leaned forward intently. "You have something I didn't have, Marcus. You've seen the consequences of both paths." "What do you mean?" "The barn will show you the dark timeline soon. What happens if you choose safety over love, if you return to your corporate life instead of pursuing the woman in the photographs?" "It's not pretty." She closed the album and met his eyes directly. "The question is, will you be brave enough to fight for the future you want, or will you let fear rob you of the life you're meant to live?" Marcus returned to the barn 3 days later, Elizabeth's warnings echoing in his mind. The valley felt different now, less mysterious, more purposeful, as if the land itself was waiting for him to make a choice. He approached the weathered structure with new understanding, no longer a visitor, but a participant in something larger than himself. Inside, the golden light seemed dimmer, more urgent. Objects that had appeared magical before now felt weighted with responsibility. Marcus moved directly to a table he hadn't explored before. Drawn by an instinct he couldn't explain, two identical watches lay side by side, both bearing his grandfather's initials, but showing different times. The first displayed the current time precisely, 2:47 p.m. The second showed the same time, but felt different somehow, as if the numbers carried alternate meaning. Marcus picked up the left watch first. The barn shifted around him, walls becoming transparent, as reality rearranged itself into a new configuration. He stood in a corner office 40 floors above downtown Seattle, wearing an expensive suit that felt like armor against the world. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below him like a circuit board, all angles and efficiency. His reflection in the glass showed a man who had aged well on the surface, but carried emptiness behind his eyes. "Congratulations, Marcus. The promotion is well-deserved." His boss, David Chen, shook his hand with corporate enthusiasm. "Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. 6-figure bonus, stock options, corner office. Everything you've worked toward." Marcus heard himself respond with appropriate gratitude, but the words felt hollow. At 55, he had achieved every professional goal he'd set, accumulated wealth beyond his original dreams, earned respect from colleagues and competitors alike. The success was comprehensive and entirely unsatisfying. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Dinner with the Morrison account at 8 p.m. Car will pick you up at 7:30. Another evening of networking disguised as socializing. Another performance of professional competence that left him feeling like an actor who'd forgotten his real identity. Marcus looked around the office that represented 15 years of climbing corporate ladders, seeing it clearly for the first time. Awards and certificates covered one wall, documenting achievements that had once seemed important. Photos showed him at company events, always smiling, always professional, always alone. No family pictures graced his desk because there was no family to display. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Wells, your 3 o'clock appointment is here. Send them in." But instead of a client, his sister Jessica entered, looking older and concerned. In this timeline, she'd been trying to reconnect with him for years, worried about his increasing isolation. "Marcus, I'm glad I caught you. Mom's been asking when you'll visit. It's been 6 months since you've seen her. I've been busy with the Morrison acquisition. You know how it is." "No, I don't know how it is. You've been using work as an excuse to avoid family for years now. Mom's 78, Marcus. She won't be around forever." The conversation continued with familiar patterns, Jessica pushing for connection, Marcus deflecting with professional obligations, both of them frustrated by the dance they'd performed countless times. In this timeline, their relationship had withered through Marcus's inability to prioritize anything beyond career advancement. After Jessica left, Marcus sat alone in his office as shadows lengthened across the city. At 60, he would retire with substantial wealth and no one to share it with. His mother would die while he was in a business meeting he'd consider too important to reschedule. Jessica would stop calling eventually, tired of his emotional unavailability. The vision accelerated through years of increasing isolation. Marcus bought expensive toys, cars, art, technology, trying to fill the void where relationships should have been. He dated occasionally, but never seriously, too comfortable in his solitude to risk the vulnerability that love required. At 70, he would die of a heart attack in this same office, working late on a Saturday night because he had nowhere else to go. The newspaper obituary would list his professional achievements, but mention no surviving family, no close friends, no lasting connections beyond business. Associates who knew his reputation but not his heart. The funeral would be well attended by colleagues who respected his work but had never known the man behind the corporate persona. They would speak of his dedication, his success, his contribution to the company's growth. No one would mention that he'd been profoundly lonely for the last 30 years of his life. Marcus dropped the watch and staggered backward, gasping as the vision released him. The barn's golden light seemed harsh now, illuminating a future that was entirely possible, probable even, if he continued on his current path. The second watch lay waiting, promising a different story, but Marcus needed time to absorb what he'd just witnessed. The successful timeline felt more like a warning than a dream, showing him exactly what his achievements would cost if he chose safety over connection. Marcus drove to Missoula the next morning, his phone's GPS guiding him to an address that had appeared mysteriously in his contacts. The city sprawled along the Clark Fork River, surrounded by mountains that caught the morning light like ancient guardians. He'd visited Montana's largest city several times for business, but had never noticed its charm. Tree-lined streets, historic buildings, the easy pace of a place where people still made eye contact with strangers. Elena's address led him to a converted warehouse district where artists had transformed industrial spaces into studios and galleries. Marcus parked across from a coffee shop called The Daily Grind, consulting the mysterious receipt. He'd found in the barn that showed a purchase for 2 coffees scheduled for today. Through the large windows, he could see her. Elena Rodriguez sat at a corner table, dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing paint-stained jeans and a faded red sweater. She worked intently on a laptop, occasionally pausing to sip from a ceramic mug while she considered whatever was on her screen. A large portfolio leaned against her chair, and scattered papers suggested someone juggling multiple projects. Marcus watched her for 20 minutes, paralyzed by the surreal experience of seeing someone from impossible photographs walking around in the real world. She moved with unconscious grace, the kind of natural elegance that couldn't be learned or faked. When she smiled at something on her computer screen, Marcus felt his heart skip exactly as it had in the wedding vision. A coffee shop receipt dated today, showing 2 drinks. The barn had somehow arranged this meeting, but Marcus still had to find the courage to walk through the door. Elena looked up as he entered, their eyes meeting across the crowded space. For a moment, time seemed to pause, while some deeper recognition passed between them. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to place where she'd seen him before. Marcus approached her table with careful steps, feeling like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. "Excuse me, but are you Elena Rodriguez?" "Yes." Her voice carried a slight accent, warm and musical. "Do we know each other?" "You look familiar?" "I don't think so. But I was hoping we could talk. I know this sounds strange, but I think we're supposed to meet." Elena studied his face with artist's eyes, seeing something that made her gesture to the empty chair across from her. "Supposed to meet? That's either very romantic or very creepy." "I'm hoping for romantic." Marcus sat down, fumbling for words that could possibly explain his situation without sounding insane. "I'm Marcus Wells. I've been hiking in the mountains for the past few weeks, trying to figure out what to do with my life. And your cosmic journey led you to a coffee shop in Missoula." "Something like that. What kind of work do you do?" Elena's face lit up as she turned her laptop screen toward him. "Freelance graphic design, mostly for non-profits and small businesses. It pays the bills while I work on my real passion." The screen showed a website design for a literacy program, clean and functional, but infused with warmth that reflected Elena's personality. Marcus found himself genuinely interested, not just because of the visions, but because her work demonstrated the kind of purpose he'd been missing from his own career. "What's your real passion?" "Sculpture and mixed media installations. I work with found objects, creating art that tells stories about connection and community." Elena gestured toward her portfolio. "Most people think it's too weird for commercial success, but I'd rather make art that matters than art that sells." Marcus thought about the journals he'd read, future entries describing Elena's artistic vision and their collaborative creative projects. "Can I see some of your work?" Elena hesitated, then opened her portfolio with the vulnerability of someone sharing a piece of her soul. The photographs showed sculptures that transformed discarded materials into profound statements about human resilience. Broken mirrors became mosaics, representing shattered lives rebuilt into something beautiful. Twisted metal evolved into flowing forms that suggested growth through adversity. These are incredible. You're incredibly talented. Thank you. Most people don't understand conceptual art, especially when it's made from garbage. It's not garbage when you're done with it. It's transformation. Elena looked at him with new interest. You sound like you understand the creative process. Are you an artist? Marcus considered the question. In his corporate life, creativity meant finding efficient solutions to business problems. But the future journals had shown him developing genuine artistic vision, learning to express deeper truths through sculpture and mixed media. I'm thinking about it. I used to work in technology, but I'm considering a major career change. What kind of change? Something that matters more than profit margins. Maybe art, maybe teaching, maybe something I haven't discovered yet. Elena smiled, and Marcus felt the same warmth he'd experienced in the wedding vision. Those are the best kind of changes, the ones that scare you into becoming who you're supposed to be. Marcus returned to the barn that evening, his mind churning with the reality of meeting Elena. She had agreed to see him again tomorrow, suggesting they visit a local gallery opening together. The easy connection they'd shared felt both natural and impossible. How could he know someone so well after a single conversation? Inside the barn, he discovered a new table had appeared, or perhaps he simply hadn't noticed it before. Upon it lay a single newspaper, yellowed with age, but bearing a date 28 years in the future. The headline made his stomach drop. Local artist Marcus Wells dies at 60. Remembered as reclusive sculptor, Marcus picked up the paper with trembling hands, recognizing the masthead of the Missoula Independent. The obituary was brief and devastating in its sparse details. Marcus Wells, 60, died alone in his studio apartment Tuesday from an apparent heart attack. Wells, who worked as a night security guard at the university, was an amateur sculptor whose work was never publicly displayed. He had no known relatives and few acquaintances. Neighbors described him as a quiet man who kept to himself. His landlord discovered the body after Wells failed to pay rent for 3 weeks. A small collection of sculptures found in his apartment will be donated to local charities. Memorial services are pending. The accompanying photograph showed Marcus at 60, gaunt and hollow-eyed, bearing little resemblance to the confident artist from the positive timeline. This version of him looked defeated, worn down by decades of isolation and unfulfilled dreams. Additional details painted a picture of devastating loneliness. This Marcus had indeed left his corporate job to pursue art, but without guidance or support, he'd never developed his talent beyond amateur level. Financial struggles forced him into menial work that consumed his energy and crushed his spirit. He'd never learned to connect with other artists, never found mentors or collaborators, never built the community that made creative life sustainable. Most telling was a sidebar article about Elena Rodriguez, now a successful artist whose sculptures were displayed in museums across the country. She had married a fellow artist and raised 2 children while building an international reputation. The article mentioned her upcoming retrospective at the Whitney Museum, celebrating 30 years of groundbreaking work. In this timeline, Marcus and Elena had never met again after their coffee shop encounter. He'd been too paralyzed by the impossible knowledge of their destined connection to pursue the relationship naturally. Instead of letting love develop organically, he'd tried to force the future he'd seen, coming across as obsessive and strange. Elena had avoided him, eventually moving to New York for graduate school and never returning to Montana. Without Elena's influence and support, Marcus had attempted artistic development alone. His sculptures lacked the collaborative vision that had made his future work significant. He'd never learned to transform found objects into meaningful statements about human connection because he'd never experienced that connection himself. The newspaper's art section included a review of Elena's final major installation before her move to New York. Connection, Disconnection, a powerful piece about missed opportunities and the tragedy of people who are meant to find each other but never do. The reviewer noted the artist's particular sensitivity to themes of loneliness and missed connection, suggesting personal experience with such loss. Marcus realized with growing horror that Elena had felt their brief connection too, but his clumsy attempts to manufacture destiny had driven her away. In trying to control the future he'd seen, he'd destroyed the very possibility of that future coming true. The obituary's final paragraph was most damning. Wells leaves behind no published works, no artistic legacy, and no family. His sculptures, while showing technical competence, never found an audience or critical recognition. He will be remembered primarily as a cautionary tale about the importance of human connection in artistic development. A small box at the bottom of the page contained information about Elena's charity work, establishing a foundation that helped struggling artists find community and mentorship. The foundation's mission statement read, "No artist should face their creative journey alone. Art flourishes through collaboration, support, and shared vision." Marcus understood now why the barn had shown him this dark timeline. It wasn't enough to know about Elena, to understand their potential together. He had to approach their relationship with authenticity rather than manipulation, allowing natural connection to develop instead of trying to force predetermined outcomes. The newspaper crumbled to dust in his hands, leaving only the memory of what would happen if he let fear and desperation guide his choices. Tomorrow's gallery opening wasn't just a date. It was a test of whether he could build something real with Elena or destroy their possibilities through his own anxiety about controlling the future. The barn's golden light seemed to pulse with urgency, reminding him that knowledge of destiny was worthless without the wisdom to let that destiny unfold naturally. Marcus met Elena at the Radius Gallery on Higgins Avenue, arriving 5 minutes early to calm his nerves. The barn's warnings about forcing destiny echoed in his mind as he watched people stream into the opening reception. He'd decided to be completely honest about himself, his corporate background, his uncertainty about the future, his growing desire to create something meaningful with his life. Elena appeared in a flowing black dress that transformed her from the casual artist he'd met yesterday into someone elegant and sophisticated. But her smile remained warm and genuine as she spotted him near the entrance. "You look nervous," she said, linking her arm through his with comfortable familiarity. "Gallery openings aren't that scary, I promise. I've never been to one before. Not sure about the proper etiquette. Rule 1. Pretend you understand what the artist was trying to say. Rule 2. Drink wine and let other people do most of the talking. Rule 3. If someone asks your opinion, say it's provocative and nod thoughtfully." Marcus laughed, feeling tension drain from his shoulders. This was the Elena from the journals, playful, wise, able to find humor in intimidating situations. The gallery showcased local emerging artists, their work spanning everything from traditional landscapes to abstract installations that challenged conventional definitions of art. Marcus found himself genuinely engaged, asking Eleanor questions about technique and meaning rather than simply pretending interest. "You have good instincts," Elena said, as they studied a mixed media piece incorporating natural materials with industrial components. "Most people either dismiss this as random junk or over-intellectualize it. You're seeing both the emotion and the craft. I'm learning to pay attention to things I used to ignore. Turns out there's a lot of beauty hiding in plain sight." They moved through the gallery slowly, Elena explaining artistic concepts with the passion of someone who lived and breathed creative expression. Marcus absorbed her insights, understanding for the first time why art mattered beyond decoration or investment. "What draws you to sculpture?" he asked as they paused before a bronze piece depicting intertwined figures. "The permanence, I suppose. Paintings capture moments, but sculptures exist in space the same way people do. You can walk around them, see them from different angles. Understand that perspective changes everything. Marcus thought about the visions in the barn, how the same future could appear wonderful or tragic depending on how he approached it. Perspective changes everything, he repeated. That's profound. My philosophy professor in college used to say that wisdom isn't about having the right answers. It's about learning to ask better questions. They found themselves in a quiet corner where Elena's own piece was displayed, a sculpture created from broken mirrors and twisted metal that somehow conveyed both destruction and renewal. A small placard identified it as second chances. You didn't tell me your work was in this show. Elena blushed slightly. I wanted to see if you'd notice it on your own. Artists can be insecure about their work, especially when it's personal. Marcus studied the sculpture with new appreciation. Up close, he could see how Elena had transformed fragments of broken glass into something that caught and reflected light in unexpected ways. The twisted metal provided structure while suggesting movement, growth, the possibility of transformation. It's about starting over, isn't it? Taking the pieces of something broken and building something new. How did you know? Because that's what I'm trying to do with my own life. Figure out how to build something meaningful from the pieces of who I used to be. Elena looked at him with new intensity. Most people see the broken parts and assume damage. You see potential for transformation. Their conversation was interrupted by a tall man with paint-stained fingers who embraced Elena warmly. Elena, the piece looks incredible in this lighting. Marcus, this is David Chen, one of my oldest friends and the most talented painter in Montana. David, meet Marcus Wells. Marcus shook David's hand, recognizing the name from the future journals. In the positive timeline, David would become one of their closest friends, serving as best man at their wedding and godfather to their son. Nice to meet you, Marcus. Elena's been talking about meeting someone interesting yesterday. I was beginning to think she'd made you up. I'm real, though sometimes I question that myself lately. David laughed. Artists understand that feeling. Reality gets pretty flexible when you're creating something new. As the evening continued, Marcus found himself relaxing into genuine conversation with Elena and her circle of artist friends. He shared stories from his corporate life that highlighted its absurdities rather than its achievements, making people laugh with his observations about boardroom politics and meaningless meetings. You should write about that world, suggested Sarah, a novelist who joined their group. Insider perspective on corporate culture could make fascinating satire. I've never thought of myself as a writer. Neither did I until I started writing, Elena said. Sometimes we don't discover our talents until we're ready to use them. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself helping Elena move supplies into a new studio space she'd rented in the warehouse district. Their relationship had developed naturally through shared dinners, long walks, and countless conversations about art, life, and the courage required to pursue authentic dreams. He'd told her about his corporate burnout and desire for meaningful work, though he'd kept the barn's supernatural revelations to himself. As they carried Elena's sculptures and equipment up 3 flights of stairs, Marcus marveled at how effortlessly their partnership had emerged. They worked together with the easy rhythm of people who understood each other's needs without explanation. This piece goes against the north wall, Elena directed, indicating a work in progress that would become one of her most significant installations. The morning light will show the metal's texture better there. Marcus positioned the sculpture carefully, then stepped back to appreciate how the space was taking shape. Elena had an artist's eye for spatial relationships, transforming the raw industrial space into an environment that would nurture creativity. "What's this one about?" he asked, gesturing toward a partially completed work that incorporated weathered wood and polished stone. Connection across time. How past and present inform each other. How we're all connected to people we've never met through shared experiences and inherited wisdom. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The theme matched exactly what he'd experienced in the barn, the strange connection between past and future. The way Jeremiah Cain's vision had reached across more than a century to guide his choices. Sounds like you understand something about time that most people miss. Elena paused in her unpacking, looking at him with curious intensity. Sometimes I feel like I'm working towards something I can't quite see yet. Like there's a larger pattern I'm part of, but I only understand my small piece of it. Before Marcus could respond, Elena's phone buzzed with an urgent call. She answered with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to handling multiple responsibilities. Elena Rodriguez. Yes, I can hold. She covered the phone and whispered to Marcus, "Doctor's office. Probably just test results." But as the conversation continued, Eleanor's expression shifted from casual attention to growing concern. Marcus watched her face change, seeing fear replace the easy confidence she normally carried. "Are you sure? When do I need to come in?" Elena's voice remained steady, but her free hand gripped the edge of a workbench until her knuckles turned white. "Tomorrow at 2. Yes, I'll be there." She ended the call and stood motionless for a long moment, staring at her phone as if it contained information she couldn't quite process. "Elena, what's wrong?" "They found something in my blood work. Dr. Patterson wants to run more tests, discuss treatment options." She looked up at Marcus with eyes that struggled to maintain composure. "It might be nothing. Probably nothing." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him, remembering the medical diagnosis report he'd found in the barn. The document had shown Elena's battle with a serious illness, their journey through treatment together, the way crisis had deepened rather than destroyed their relationship. But that future assumed they would face the challenge as a committed couple. They'd been dating for only 2 weeks. Most people would consider it natural, even sensible, to step back from a new relationship complicated by serious health concerns. "Do you want me to come with you tomorrow?" Elena studied his face, clearly torn between independence and the desire for support. "Marcus, we barely know each other. This isn't your problem to solve." "Maybe not. But if you're facing something difficult, you shouldn't have to face it alone. It could be serious, really serious. Are you sure you want to get involved with someone who might have major health problems?" Marcus thought about the alternative futures he'd witnessed, the timeline where he achieved professional success but died alone, the one where he'd driven Elena away through his desperation to control their destiny. He understood now that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to stand with someone through imperfection. "I'm sure I want to know you better, whatever that means. If you're dealing with health issues, that's part of knowing you." Elena's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, tears flowing freely as she allowed herself to acknowledge her fear. Marcus stepped forward and held her, feeling the trust she offered, by allowing him to see her vulnerability. "I'm scared," she whispered against his shoulder. "I've worked so hard to build this life, this career. What if I'm running out of time to accomplish everything I want to do?" Marcus thought about the future journals, the beautiful life they could build together if they had courage to face uncertainty with shared faith rather than individual fear. "Then we make sure whatever time you have counts for something important. Together, if you'll let me." In Elena's silence, Marcus felt the weight of choice that would determine not just their individual futures, but the possibility of the love story he'd witnessed in impossible photographs. Marcus returned to the barn that night, seeking answers to questions he couldn't voice to Elena. The structure welcomed him with familiar golden light, but something had changed in the weeks since his first visit. The air hummed with different energy, more focused and urgent, as if time itself was accelerating towards some crucial moment. He found a new artifact waiting on the central table, an ornate brass key, heavy with age and purpose. The metal was warm to the touch, despite the cool mountain air, and intricate engravings covered its surface, symbols that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. The key drew him toward a section of the barn he'd never explored, where shadows gathered thick against the far wall. As he approached, he discovered what appeared to be solid wood was actually an optical illusion. The key slipped easily into a lock hidden behind the visual distortion, opening a door that led deeper into the barn's impossible interior. Beyond the threshold lay a circular chamber that defied the building's external dimensions. The walls curved upward into darkness, lined with shelves containing thousands of objects, each one glowing softly with internal light. The space felt ancient yet timeless, like a library designed to house memories rather than books. At the center of the chamber stood an elderly man who looked exactly like Marcus might in 40 years. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, but carried himself with the dignity of someone who had found peace with his choices. His hair was silver white, his face lined with decades of weather and experience, but his eyes held the same intelligence that Marcus saw in his own mirror. "Hello, Marcus. I've been waiting for you to find this place." Marcus stared at his older self, mind struggling to process another impossibility. "You're me?" "From the future. I'm one possible version of you. The one who chose correctly, who found the courage to love Elena completely and build the life you've seen in the photographs." The older Marcus gestured to the shelves surrounding them. "This is where all possibilities converge, where every choice creates ripples across time. Are you real or just another vision? Does it matter? I'm here to help you understand what you've truly found in this barn." The older Marcus moved to one of the shelves and withdrew a crystal orb no larger than a baseball. Within its depths, Marcus could see swirling patterns of light that suggested vast complexity. Jeremiah Kane wasn't just a homesteader, Marcus. He was a guardian, chosen to protect this place where time becomes fluid. The barn exists as a test, a way to identify people who are ready to accept responsibility for others' futures. What kind of responsibility? The kind that comes with knowledge. You've seen your own possibilities, but every choice you make affects countless others. Elena's illness, your response to it, the love you build together, it all ripples outward, touching lives you'll never know about. The older Marcus held up the crystal orb, and its light revealed visions of interconnected lives, spreading like a vast web through time. Marcus saw Elena's art inspiring young people to pursue creative dreams. He saw their son David becoming a teacher who influenced hundreds of students. He saw the foundation Elena would establish, helping struggling artists find community and purpose. But he also saw the darker possibilities. Without their love story, Elena would focus entirely on her career, achieving success but dying alone. David would never be born, never teach the children who would become leaders and innovators. The foundation would never exist, leaving countless artists to struggle in isolation. One relationship affects all of this. Love is the most powerful force in the universe, Marcus. Not romantic love specifically, but the choice to care more about someone else's well-being than your own comfort. When two people commit to that choice together, they become capable of changing the world. The older Marcus returned the orb to its shelf and selected another object, a simple wooden box, carved with the same symbols that adorned the key. Inside this box is the greatest gift and burden Jeremiah Kane left behind. The power to see all possibilities, to guide others toward their best futures, to serve as guardian for the next generation of seekers. What's the cost? You can never use this knowledge for personal gain. You must give up the barn's power after guiding one other person to their moment of choice. And you must accept that some people will choose poorly despite your guidance, just as Elizabeth Hart did 30 years ago. Marcus understood the weight of what was being offered. The visions he'd experienced were just the beginning, a test of his character and wisdom. If he proved worthy, he would inherit Jeremiah Kane's role as guardian, helping others navigate their crucial moments while sacrificing his own access to future knowledge. Why me? Because you've already chosen love over fear, others over self. Because Elena's illness will teach you that the most important futures are the ones we create together, not the ones we try to control alone. The older Marcus smiled with deep contentment. The test isn't whether you'll accept this responsibility. The test is whether you'll prove worthy of Elena's love when it matters most. The older Marcus opened the wooden box, revealing a sphere of pure crystal that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its depths. As light swirled through its transparent surface, Marcus glimpsed fragments of countless lives, millions of human stories, intersecting and influencing each other across generations. "This is the heart of what Jeremiah Kane created," his older self explained. "The ability to see the connections between all human choices, to understand how individual decisions ripple through time to affect people decades or centuries in the future." Marcus stared into the crystal's depths, watching patterns emerge and dissolve like cosmic weather systems. He saw Elena's artistic vision inspiring a young girl who would grow up to become a renowned architect, designing buildings that prioritized human connection over profit. He saw their son David teaching a student who would develop new methods for treating depression, helping millions of people find hope, but the visions expanded beyond their immediate family. Marcus watched a man named Robert Chen, Thomas's grandson, facing his own moment of choice in 30 years. Robert would discover the barn during his own crisis, needing guidance to choose between a lucrative but soulless career and a path that served others. Marcus realized that accepting guardianship meant committing to help Robert navigate his crucial decision. "Each guardian serves one generation," the older Marcus continued. Jeremiah guided travelers in the 1890s. Elizabeth Hart was meant to guide someone in the 1990s, but chose fear over service. Now you have the opportunity to complete what she couldn't, preparing the next generation for their own test. What if I'm not wise enough? What if I guide someone wrong? Wisdom isn't about having perfect answers. It's about helping people ask the right questions, just as Elena told you. The crystal doesn't show you what to tell them. It shows you how to help them discover their own truth. Marcus saw himself in the future, older and grayer, meeting Robert Chen in this same chamber. But the vision felt different from the predetermined futures he'd witnessed earlier. This possibility carried weight and responsibility that transformed it from fantasy into sacred duty. Elena doesn't know about any of this. She will when the time is right. But first, you must prove yourself worthy of both her love and this responsibility. The test isn't your willingness to accept guardianship. It's whether you can love Elena completely without using future knowledge to control your relationship. The older Marcus gestured toward the crystal sphere. "Touch it, and you'll understand the true scope of what love can accomplish when it's freely chosen rather than manipulated." Marcus hesitated, understanding that this contact would change him permanently. Once he saw the full network of human connection, he could never return to the simpler worldview where individual choices seemed isolated and consequences remained hidden. He placed his palm against the crystal's surface. Reality exploded into infinite complexity. Marcus experienced the consciousness of every person whose life would be touched by his choices. Elena's parents, who would find healing from their own troubled marriage by watching their daughter build something beautiful with Marcus. The students in David's future classrooms, learning not just academic subjects, but life lessons about courage and compassion. The artists who would benefit from Elena's foundation, creating works that would inspire others for generations. But he also saw the failures, people who would choose poorly despite guidance, relationships that would end in pain, dreams that would remain unfulfilled. The crystal showed everything, holding space for both triumph and tragedy without judgment. Most overwhelming was his vision of Elena herself, seen not just as the woman he loved, but as a complete soul carrying her own sacred purpose. Her art wasn't just personal expression. It was her way of healing a world that had forgotten how to see beauty in broken things. Her illness would teach both of them that love meant accepting uncertainty, that the most profound connections were built not on guarantees, but on mutual choice to face the unknown together. Marcus saw their future son not as fulfillment of his paternal desires, but as a unique individual with his own destiny to discover. David would face his own crucial choices, guided not by his parents' expectations, but by the foundation of unconditional love they would provide. The vision expanded beyond their family to encompass the entire web of human connection. Every act of love, kindness, or courage created ripples that strengthened the whole. Every choice made from fear or selfishness weakened the network that bound all lives together. Marcus understood finally why Elena's illness was necessary. It would strip away his illusions about controlling the future, teaching him to love without guarantees, to choose commitment not because of what he knew would happen, but because of who he chose to become. When he removed his hand from the crystal, Marcus felt transformed. He was still himself, but now he carried awareness of his place in the larger story of human connection. The barn had tested his character and found him worthy of responsibility that extended far beyond his personal happiness. "Now you understand," the older Marcus said softly. "Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing to grow into the person worthy of the love you receive." The older Marcus led him to a final table where a blank leather journal lay open, its pages pristine and waiting. Beside it rested an antique fountain pen that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "This is your choice, Marcus. Accept the guardianship, and you write the final entry in this journal, a message for the next person who will find this place. But doing so will seal the barn's power forever. No one else will experience what you've experienced here." Marcus understood the weight of the decision. By accepting responsibility for guiding future seekers, he would destroy the very mechanism that had guided him. The barn would become ordinary, its supernatural properties transferred to him and eventually to whoever he chose to succeed him. What about other people who need this guidance? What about Elena if she faces her own crisis? Elena has her own path to wisdom, Marcus. She doesn't need visions of the future. She has the courage to create it through faith and love. The barn was never meant to be a permanent crutch, but a temporary bridge for those who needed help crossing from fear to courage. The older Marcus smiled with deep peace. "Besides, you'll be there to guide her through whatever comes. That's what partnership means, becoming each other's source of strength when supernatural help isn't available." Marcus looked around the impossible chamber one final time, memorizing details he would never see again. The shelves of glowing artifacts, the crystal sphere containing infinite possibilities, the sense of existing outside normal time, all would vanish the moment he made his choice. "If I do this, how will I know how to help the next person? The same way you learned to love Elena, by paying attention, asking the right questions, and trusting that wisdom comes through experience rather than mystical knowledge." Marcus picked up the fountain pen, feeling its weight and purpose. The blank journal waited for words that would transform him from seeker to guardian, from someone who received guidance to someone who provided it. He thought about Elena waiting at home, probably researching her condition on the internet, trying to prepare for tomorrow's appointment with characteristic determination. He thought about Robert Chen, who wouldn't be born for another decade, but would eventually need help navigating his own crucial decision. He thought about all the unknown people whose lives would be touched by the choice he made in this moment. The pen moved across the page as if guided by its own intelligence. "To whoever finds this journal, you've discovered something that challenges everything you believed about fate, choice, and possibility. The artifacts around you show glimpses of futures that could be, not predictions of what must be. Your real power isn't in seeing tomorrow, it's in choosing who you become today. Love is the force that transforms possibility into reality. Not just romantic love, but the decision to care more about others' well-being than your own comfort. Every choice you make from love strengthens the web that connects all human lives." Every choice made from fear weakens that connection. If you're reading this, you've reached your own moment of decision. Whatever future called you here, whether it involves another person, a career change, or a completely different path, remember that knowledge of outcomes matters less than courage to act with integrity. The hardest lesson is that some futures require letting go of control. Love means choosing someone not because you know they're perfect for you, but because you're willing to grow into the person worthy of their love. Purpose means serving something larger than your own desires, even when you can't see the full impact of your service. When you leave this place, the barn will become ordinary. Its power will transfer to you, not supernatural ability, but the wisdom to help others find their own courage when they need it most. Use this gift carefully. Guide by asking questions, not providing answers. Help people discover their own truth rather than imposing your vision on their choices. Remember, the future belongs to those brave enough to love without guarantees. As Marcus signed his name to the entry, the barn around him began to change. The golden light faded to ordinary sunlight streaming through windows that had appeared in walls that had been solid moments before. The artifacts dissolved into dust, their purposes fulfilled. The crystal sphere cracked into fragments that turned to powder and blew away on a breeze that shouldn't have existed inside a building. Within minutes, Marcus stood alone in an empty barn that looked exactly as old and weathered as it should have after 130 years of mountain weather. Only the journal remained, its pages now bound shut and sealed with wax that bore Jeremiah Cain's initials. Marcus walked to the door and turned for one last look at the place that had changed his life. It was just a barn now, special only for the memories it contained and the wisdom he carried forward. But that seemed exactly right. He no longer needed supernatural guidance because he'd learned to trust his own capacity for love and service. Marcus drove straight to Elena's apartment, arriving just as she was returning from her doctor's appointment. He could read the news in her face before she spoke, the careful composure that masked fear, the way she held her shoulders too straight, the determined smile that didn't reach her eyes. The tests confirmed it, she said without preamble as he climbed out of his truck. Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 2, which means it spread to nearby lymph nodes, but still considered highly treatable. Marcus felt the words hit him like physical blows, even though he'd known this moment was coming. Knowing the future and experiencing it were entirely different things. His immediate impulse was to reassure her with the knowledge that she would survive, thrive, that their love story would include decades of happiness beyond this crisis. Instead, he simply opened his arms and held her as she finally allowed herself to cry. "I'm scared, Marcus. I know the statistics are good, but I keep thinking about all the things I haven't done yet, all the art I haven't created. What if I run out of time? Then we make sure the time you have counts for everything," he said, echoing words his older self had spoken in the barn. "But Elena, you're not facing this alone. I'm here for whatever this brings." She pulled back to study his face. "Marcus, we've been dating for 3 weeks. This isn't your responsibility." "You're right. It's not my responsibility. It's my choice." Elena searched his eyes, looking for doubt or hesitation that might signal future abandonment. What she found instead was the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided, completely and irrevocably. "The treatment will be rough. Chemo, radiation possibly, months of uncertainty. I might be sick, bald, not myself for a while. Are you sure you want to sign up for that?" Marcus thought about the wedding photos he'd seen, showing Eleanor radiant and healthy, but with the fine scars of someone who had fought and won a difficult battle. He remembered the journal entries, describing how crisis had deepened rather than destroyed their connection, teaching them that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to grow together through imperfection. "I'm sure I want to know you better, whatever that includes. If fighting cancer is part of your story right now, then I want to be part of that story too." They moved inside her apartment, where Elena's artwork covered every wall. Sculptures in various stages of completion filled the space, along with sketches and notes for future projects. Marcus saw her creative vision with new appreciation, understanding how her art would evolve through their life together to touch countless other lives. I need to tell my parents, my sister, figure out how to manage treatment around work schedules. Elena moved with the brisk efficiency of someone trying to outrun panic through action. The oncologist wants to start treatment next week. What can I do to help? Elena paused in her nervous organizing, clearly unused to accepting support from someone outside her immediate family. I don't know. I've always handled things alone. Maybe that's something we could figure out together. Over the following hours, Marcus learned the practical reality of loving someone through crisis. It meant driving Elena to additional tests and consultations, sitting in waiting rooms filled with other people facing their own battles, learning medical terminology that no one should have to understand. But it also meant smaller gestures that mattered more than grand declarations, making sure Elena ate when stress killed her appetite, listening without trying to fix when she needed to voice her fears, being present without being overwhelming, offering support without removing her agency to make her own decisions. That evening, they sat on Elena's couch looking through portfolios of her work, planning which pieces to complete before treatment began and which could wait until she felt stronger. This one is important, Elena said, indicating sketches for a large installation about resilience and transformation. I want to finish it while I still have energy. It feels like something I need to say before the cancer changes how I see the world. Marcus studied the sketches, recognizing themes that would appear throughout Elena's future work. The idea that beauty emerged from struggle, that broken things could be transformed into something stronger than they were originally. What if the cancer doesn't change how you see the world, but deepens what you already understand? Elena looked at him with surprise. You think fighting for my life might make my art better? I think fighting for anything important changes us. The question is whether we let it make us bitter or wise. That night they made love with the tenderness of people who understood that time was precious but not guaranteed. No desperate passion or dramatic declarations, just the quiet intimacy of two people choosing each other, despite uncertainty about what tomorrow might bring. 5 years later, Marcus stood in the backyard of the house he and Elena had bought together, watching their 3-year-old son David attempt to untangle a fishing line, with the same determined concentration his father had once applied to corporate problems. The boy had Elena's expressive eyes and Marcus's stubborn jawline, creating a perfect blend of his parents' best qualities. "Need some help there, buddy?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside his son in the exact scene he had witnessed during his first vision in the barn. "It's all tangled up. Daddy, I think I broke it." Marcus worked the line free with practiced patience, remembering his grandfather's lessons about taking time to understand problems before trying to fix them. "There we go. Good as new." David beamed with the admiration that only small children can express so purely. "You can fix anything, Daddy." "Not everything," Marcus replied, glancing toward the house where Eleanor worked in her studio. Through the window, he could see her putting finishing touches on a sculpture that would be displayed at the Whitney Museum next month. Her hair had grown back thicker and more beautiful than before, and the fine scars from her port were barely visible unless you knew where to look. The cancer treatment had been exactly as difficult as predicted, but also exactly as successful. Elena's strength had surprised everyone, including herself. She'd continued working throughout chemotherapy, creating some of her most powerful pieces while fighting for her life. The experience had deepened her art rather than diminishing it, proving that wisdom often emerged from struggle. Marcus had learned lessons during those months that no business school could have taught. How to love someone who was temporarily weak without making them feel helpless. How to be strong for both of them without pretending he wasn't afraid. How to support Elena's independence while building genuine partnership. Their wedding had taken place in the small chapel Marcus had seen in the photographs, exactly 5 years after his first visit to the barn. Elena wore the flowing white dress from the vision, and their vows spoke of choosing each other daily rather than making promises about an unknowable future. David's birth, 18 months later, had transformed them both, just as the future journals had predicted. But the reality proved deeper than any written description could convey. Holding his son for the first time, Marcus understood what Elena had meant about love being a daily choice, not just romantic love, but the commitment to put someone else's well-being ahead of your own comfort, permanently and without reservation. Now, watching David struggle with the fishing line, Marcus marveled at how completely his life had changed. He'd left his corporate career to pursue sculpture, initially working with Elena in her studio before developing his own artistic voice. Financial struggles had tested their relationship, but they'd discovered that shared purpose mattered more than material comfort. His art had evolved differently than the future journal suggested, focusing on installations that helped communities process collective trauma. Corporate consulting had taught him about systems and structures, but cancer had taught him about resilience and healing. The combination created work that bridged practical problem-solving with emotional truth. Elena's foundation was thriving, providing resources and community for struggling artists across the country. The organization had grown from Elena's personal experience of facing crisis with support into a movement that strengthened the entire artistic ecosystem. Hundreds of artists had found mentorship, funding, and collaborative opportunities through programs Elena designed. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus had begun serving in his role as guardian. 3 months ago, a young man named Robert Chen had contacted him about strange dreams and an overwhelming sense that he needed to make major life changes. Marcus had guided Robert through conversations that helped him discover his own truth rather than following other people's expectations. The process felt natural now, like teaching David to fish or helping Elena prepare for gallery openings. Wisdom Marcus had learned wasn't about having mystical knowledge, but about asking questions that help people discover their own courage. "Daddy, can we go fishing now?" "Absolutely. Let's see if the fish are biting today." As they walked toward the small pond Marcus had built behind their house, he caught sight of Eleanor watching from her studio window. She waved, and he felt the same warm recognition he'd experienced in every vision the barn had shown him. The future had unfolded exactly as predicted in its broad strokes, but the daily reality proved richer than any photograph could capture. Love wasn't a destination, but a choice they made every morning when they woke up beside each other. Family wasn't a collection of people, but a commitment to growth that included struggle alongside joy. Behind them, Elena emerged from her studio, carrying a drawing David had made the previous week, a crayon sketch of their family standing together beneath a rainbow. Signed, "Love, Daddy," in a child's careful letters, Marcus had found his way home,